Professor Ananth, distinguished speaker of today's evening, Professor Nandita Dasgupta, Secretary, INAE Chennai Chapter, members of INAE Chennai Chapter, fellows and young associates of INAE, invitees and participants, friends, ladies and gentlemen, good evening to you all. At the outset, I wish to extend warm season's greetings, Merry Christmas and a very happy and healthy New Year to all present here and to all participating online. This is the first time after the INAE Chennai chapter was formally reactivated with office bearers and members about a year and a half year ago. We are meeting in a physical mode where we can greet and meet each other personally and exchange pleasantries. This month, mid December to mid January, the Margazhi month, is considered very auspicious, especially in this part of India. This is the month of music, dance, art, culture, and discourses, get togethers, and reunions. It is also the National Mathematics Day today when we celebrate the birth anniversary of the mathematical genius Srinivasan Ramanujan. It is appropriate that we are going to have a scholarly discourse and discussion very shortly on a topic very close and relevant to all of us at an appropriate time. I extend a very cordial welcome to all of you to today's webinar organized under the auspices of the INAE Chennai chapter. I extend a very special welcome to Professor M.S. Ananth, the distinguished speaker of this evening. Before I formally introduce Professor M.S. Ananth, who does not need any introduction to this or any other audience, let me briefly highlight the activities of the INAE Chennai chapter. The INAE Chennai chapter has been active all through three INAE annual conventions in 1997, 2003, and 2017 were held in Chennai. The INAE Engineers Conclave on the twin themes of engineering education and smart cities was held in IIT Madras in 2016. And it is good to recall that the session or the theme of engineering education was coordinated again by Professor M.S. Ananth. The Youth Conclave was also held once in IIT Madras. An INAE CATS joint conference on international engineering education was organized in IIT Madras in 2017. After the Chennai chapter was formally formed, the following events were organized this year online, and I will just mention them in reverse chronological order. It is also very appropriate that we are meeting in the NPTEL studio, where the concept of NPTEL and the whole of NPTEL open courseware was due to the efforts of Professor M.S. Ananth when he was director of IIT Madras. So the activities of INAE last year was the lectures given by Professor Kamakoti Vijinathan, Director IIT Madras on 25th November 2022 on education research in engineering and disruptive technologies in higher educational institutions. Then Professor Chitra Rajagopal, Director, Center of Excellence in Process Safety and Risk Management for Hydrogen Economy at IIT Delhi, gave the lecture on Process Safety and Risk Management with focus on hydrogen safety on 16 September 2022. Professor R. Krishna Kumar, Institute Professor, Engineering Design Department, IIT Madras, gave the lecture Human Heart, an Engineer's Delight and a Clinician's Nightmare on 20th August at 4 p.m. Professor Bhaskar Ramamurthy, former director and now professor at Department of Electrical Engineering, IIT Madras, gave a lecture on towards an Atmanirbhar telecom network on 8th July 2022. There is also a student lecture by Mr. Bharati Raja, who is an interdisciplinary research scholar, Department of Electrical Engineering. He gave a talk on hydrogen production through methane pyrolysis, an alternate approach to zero carbon emission. And the first lecture in this series was given by Mr. Karthik Atmanathan, Senior Vice President at Ashok Leyland and Professor of Practice at IIT Madras, on an R&D roadmap for Indian e-mobility 2022 to 2030 on 19th February 2022. INAE Chennai chapter, along with IIT Madras and ARCA Chennai Hyderabad, organized a two-day national conference on energy technologies at IIT Madras during 29-30 April 2022. Professor Sarathi of Electrical Department and Dr. Gopalan of ARCA were the coordinators of this conference. Recently, I attended the annual convention of INAE in Bark, Mumbai, when a compendium on women engineers in India, Volume 1 was released, in which 75 distinguished women engineers of India were honored. I am happy to announce that 4 women members of this chapter, Professors Kamala Kirtivasan, Nandita Dasgupta, Hema Murthy, Liji Philip, find a place in this compendium. Our heartiest congratulations to all of them. Let us give a warm applause to all. It is now my pleasure to introduce Professor M.S. Ananth. Professor M.S. Ananth was Director IIT Madras from December 2001 to July 2011. He is the architect of the world's largest open courseware in technical education, NPTEL. He established the first university-based research park in India, the IIT Madras Research Park, to promote innovation and entrepreneurship. He has been consistently rated as a good teacher. He is a fellow of the Indian Institute of Chemical Engineers and Indian National Academy of Engineering. He was member of both the Scientific Advisory Committee to the Cabinet and the National Manufacturing Competitiveness Council from 2007 to 2011. He has been a visiting professor in IIT Kanpur, IIT Bombay, IIC Bangalore, Princeton University, and the University of Colorado and RWTH Aachen, Germany. He participated in the World Economic Forum as a member of the Global University Leaders Forum from 2007 to 2011. In December 2011, INAE EC Research published a special fetch shrift issue in honor of Professor M.S. Ananth as a leading researcher, gifted teacher, and a visionary leader of higher education in India. He is also the recipient of the INAE Lifetime Contribution in Engineering Award 2021. Now over to Professor M.S. Ananth to rethink on the idea of the university. Thank you. Yeah, I will go and sit.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Narayanan. I want to thank both Professor Narayanan and Professor Nandita Dasgupta for this invitation to speak here. This is familiar grounds, and I'm also happy that they arranged it in hybrid mode. So I can see some faces, particularly familiar faces. So I want to talk about rethinking the idea of university. I've written rethinking, but this is actually what I thought several years ago. So I can't really, this is not so current, but on the other hand, the ideas that were introduced at that time were essentially needed. The outline of my talk is like this: the traditional university. I'm going to recall what many of you may already know very well, because the university as we know it is really a Renaissance concept. So I'm going to talk about the traditional university. So a lot of it may be what we are, I mean, I'm sure all of it is what we already know, but I think we tend to forget because of our routine. And secondly, as soon as I became director, this was a problem. There were lots of things that they wanted IIT to do. The ministry would say, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And so we had to make a decision beforehand as to what I would accept and what I wouldn't accept. And so I thought the best way to do that was for me to make 2 proposals. And then every time the secretary called me, he would say, I hate to call you because you will then ask me, where is this file of NPTEL and where is this file of the research park? And I felt very comfortable with that. But I think these are 2 things that we needed to do. I'll talk about that a bit more. Then I'd like to talk about some issues of governance and ethics in the university. I think my white hair certainly authorizes me to speak a little on ethics. Okay, the traditional university, the Renaissance thinkers made 3 assumptions. First, that the material world is lawful. They didn't say anything about the living world. There is a unity in knowledge that can be discovered only by a combination of natural and social sciences. I think that's an important thing. In IITs, unfortunately, our emphasis is almost completely on natural sciences. But the social sciences includes humanities and primarily humanities and law. Natural sciences includes medicine and primarily medicine, in addition to the ones that we already know. So the third assumption that they made was that education can potentially lead to indefinite human progress. There have been hiccups, but by and large, you can say that education has certainly led to tremendous progress. Then about 18, around the beginning of the 19th century, von Humboldt said, research brings passion to teaching while teaching rejuvenates the researcher, so they should both go hand in hand. The idea of university, the most famous idea of a university is the book by this English gentleman, very well known. I'm forgetting his name, but that book is written from a priest's point of view. So it has a lot of moral lecturing right through. It's a whole book. But this is an essay. The idea of a university is also an essay written by Oakeshott, who was a professor of political science in Oxford. And he said, the pursuit of learning occurs everywhere, but the main idea of a university is to engage in the pursuit of learning characterized by two factors. One is no immediate use, and by attention to detail. He said, this pursuit of learning is not for the power it may bring, not for learning the tricks of the trade, not for preparing for a future, not for service to society, not for acquisition of an outfit to see one through life. I'm not saying these won't happen, but that's not the aim of the education. The aim of the education is simply to ask what concepts you don't understand and pursue those and try and communicate that understanding. The curriculum has no such design and teaching no such intention. So Oakeshott himself says these qualities are all admirable in themselves, but they belong to a world of power and utility and exploitation. A world that is not self-critical, that is apt to mistake itself for the whole world, that assumes that whatever does not contribute to its own purposes is somewhat errant. I don't know if many of you have this experience, but interacting with the industry often gives you this impression. They tell you you're not working on anything useful. What they mean is that you're not doing anything that will bring them money. But in the face of such an ulterior purpose of this sort, Oakeshott says education steals out of the back door with noiseless steps. Rather like his essay, he's no more. He passed away way back in 92. But I think the essay is still there on the web. Chomsky also said the university's traditional ideal is to foster creative and independent thought and inquiry, challenge perceived beliefs, explore new horizons, and forget external constraints. I like the word forget external constraints. My very first consultancy in IIT Madras way back in 74, I had to design a heat exchanger. One of the fellow from the industry called me. He said, can you design this heat exchanger? It's a shell and tube heat exchanger to recover heat that was being lost through the chimney. And then he called me the next day and said, make sure you use 2-inch pipes. I said, what's that constraint? He said, my neighbor is throwing it away. I can't get anything cheaper. Then after a while, he called me again and said, make sure you don't make it longer than 4 feet, because then I have to raise the ceiling, which means, the cost is so much that it's not worth it. So it was 4-foot pipes, 2 inches. So all I had to do is arrange them on this thing and give it to him. And that's typical of the kind of constraints that come when you actually do it practice. You have to take them into account in those cases, but you can't teach that in. I can't very well come to class and say we'll use only 4 feet pipes. Basically, Chomsky himself points out that while this is the traditional ideal, it's flawed in practice, but the extent to which the ideal is realized is a measure of the level of civilization achieved. And the human and social costs of abandoning the traditional ideal are immeasurable. In fact, I remember once Mr. Kapil Sibal asked, when we had this council meeting, during tea, he said, we are spending 10 lakh rupees on education. How can I justify that? I said, if you give me such large figures, I can't justify it. I can ask what is the cost of not doing it. If that's higher, then you have to do it. And in this case, I do have an estimate, because thanks to Shashi Tharoor. Shashi Tharoor had written, and he had spoken in Oxford also. He had estimated that the Indian loss to the British was $11,500 billion. So everywhere there was a multiplication factor. It was much, much more than 10 lakh crores. So I said, compare this with that figure, and then you know how much you have to spend. But, this is actually a problem. Most of the people who you talk to think because of your salary, you will not be able to talk of many thousands of crores. But they will be surprised how many faculty can speak about spending 10 lakh crores. So let me get back to some principles of teaching. This is something that I keep sharing, but nothing can be taught is the first principle. That's Aurobindo's principle also. Uh, my favorite story, and I've said this before, is it's an anecdote due to Professor Kelkar in IIT Kanpur, who was the first director. When I joined IIT Madras, one of my friends joined IIT Kanpur, and he taught fluid mechanics for the first time. Like all enthusiastic young faculty, he tried to teach everything he knew, and just made a mess, like all of us. And then we correct ourselves the next time. And he was very frustrated, so he went to Professor Kelkar, and he was a very approachable director. He said, Professor Kelkar, I can't cover the portions. And Kelkar said, please sit down, and gave him a cup of coffee, patted him on the back, and said, young man, I did not hire you to cover any portions. I actually hired you to uncover a part of them. I like that statement very much. I keep repeating it because we all, especially, we don't take full advantage of the autonomy we have. After all, we set the paper, we give the lectures, we set the paper, we correct it, and so on. So we ought to be able to go with the flow. When some topic gets very interesting and the class is following very well, you should be able to teach some more of that. And you have that freedom, but we don't always use it. Second is that example should be from the student's own environment. This is also an Aurobindo dictum. I must say that this is not always possible in India, particularly because we are not very good at keeping track of what has been done. Some of our students in chemical engineering went to Madras refineries in those days, Chennai Petroleum. So I was trying to get some logbook data from them in order to illustrate in class, in my chemical technology class. And then it turned out that the logbook data looked so similar from year to year. So I thought there was something wrong. It was a rainy day in October, was always the same data every year. And then turned out he spoke to some of them, and then they said, sir, it's the same thing. Why should we go and measure again? We just write copy from the previous stuff. I think things have changed now, but we don't have reliable data. And because this industrial data has a lot of scatter, you can't really draw conclusions unless you have a massive amount of data. I think now it's possible, especially with the data science. The third principle is that diverse approaches to the same problem more educative than a diverse set of problems. This is the best example I can give is that of Grothendieck, the famous mathematician, who tells a story about a physicist and a mathematician. Grothendieck, it's clear from the story that Grothendieck is a mathematician, even if you didn't know before. But the physicist and a mathematician were given a cup of water and asked to make tea. So they boiled the water, added tea leaves, made tea. And then when this was over, they were both called and given empty glasses to make tea. And the physicist filled it with water, then boiled the water again, went through the process and made tea. The mathematician filled it with water, left it on the table. He said, by the previous theorem, tea has been made. You didn't get tea. But the method of the mathematician is strongly recommended that you don't do the problems again and again. If somebody has solved a problem before, you relate to that problem. And repetition is a necessary part of teaching. This is brought home to you very strongly when you teach, because you know the class is not all listening. And when I first went to the US, one of my roommates had a advisor who was very keen on my listening to a pastor. So he dragged me off to listen to a pastor on a Sunday. And this pastor spoke very well, but he repeated himself 7 times. So at the end of it, and I was a good listener in those days, so I heard all the 7 versions, and I went back and asked him, why did you repeat yourself 7 times? And he said, gee, did I do that? Then I did right, because in the school of pastors, they tell me that you reach only 1/7 of the audience at anything. The problem, of course, is that the same audience is the ones you reach 7 times. But I think repetition, therefore, is necessary anyway. But then practice leads to perfection. I'll skip that. And then what limits what we teach? There's a very nice, I don't know if the blog's still there, by Ron Brown. There's a blog. He's a professor of physics in California, Caltech. I think he participated in rewriting the notes for Feynman's lectures also. In any case, He has a blog in which he says he took his 5-year-old son to the beach and they were walking along the beach. And his kid asked, how do these waves form? And Ron said, well, I don't know if I can explain it to you. Then his son said, please try, as if the difficulty was the father's and not the son's. But this is actually true. What you understand very well, you teach undergraduates. How do you decide what to teach undergraduates, postgraduates, and so on? So if you don't understand something very well, you teach postgraduates that. And then if you don't understand it at all, you give it as a problem to the PhD student. So, I mean, really what we teach is limited by what we know rather than what we know very well, rather than the limitation of the student. The nature of research and teaching are the two characteristic things that a traditional university does. So the nature of research is basically it's a search for truth, whether it's mundane or profound. It's complex and iterative. Sometimes it's about going up blind alleys to see if they are really blind. It's a creative activity. It generates new ideas intuitively and scrutinizes them for their logical validity. And unlike research, coursework is purely logic-based. So let me say a few words about creativity in the brain. Sperry and co-workers. Sperry is a neurophysician who got his Nobel Prize in 1981. And one of his students, Gazaniga, has written a very nice book on the brain. But I mean, there's a summary in Blakesley's book. Blakesley is a co-author with Ramchandran, also V.S. Ramchandran's book on phantoms in the brain. But Blakesley's book has a summary, a simplified summary, I'm sure. But it says essentially they did the split brain experiments and they showed that the real basis of creativity is the synergy between the two halves of the brain. They said the left brain is logical, the right brain is intuitive. Freedom from logic is what makes the right so effective in generating ideas. Since most of such ideas fail when tested logically, the left brain is equally important. So it's a combination of these that really produces results that are. Some points for reflection. Aristotle and the need for logical verification. I don't know if you know, Aristotle said women have fewer teeth than men. This is something like 260 AD. It was 1400 AD before somebody actually counted the teeth of women and had the guts to say, no, women have the same number of teeth. You have to find some other reason for being superior if you want to. So that is true of both Greek and Hindu civilization. I mean, when a sage said it, you couldn't contradict him. At least you were hesitant to. Then Einstein said intuition is God's gift, logic is man's servant, yet we ignore the gift and glorify the servant. I think that's because that's the only way we know how to handle things. I mean, intuition is not something that you can teach. So the question is, can it be nurtured? I think to some extent, intuition can be nurtured if there's an atmosphere of trust. I'll come back to that. I want to say something about the role of industry. Basically, the university seeks unity in the diversity around us, tries to say there are few principles with which you can explain all of these phenomena. But the industry thrives on differences. Unless your product is different, you can't sell it. So essentially, there are two ways of looking at the world. And so industry, therefore, in my opinion, has only an interfacial role in education, not an active role. And it can share empirical knowledge with us, because very often empirical knowledge is solely with the industry. It can serve as a reality check on teaching. My favorite anecdote on this is I was teaching 30 years after I got into IIT. I was teaching mass transfer once. And I was teaching design of cooling towers. It's just a fairly standard topic in the thing, but our students have a way of letting you know that they don't trust you. They smile at you in a way to say, this fellow is a theoretical guy. He's just talking about design because he has to. So I called this Shivaraman Tyagarajan, was an old student of mine. So I called him, and he runs a cooling tower industry. So I called him and said, you have to come and speak on cooling tower design. And I said, this is Guru Dakshina, so you have to come at 9 o'clock on Monday, regardless of what other thing you have. He actually cancelled his other meetings. He came and gave a lecture. I was sitting in the back and my students didn't know. The two fellows in front of me, after half an hour, one fellow tells the other, not bad, Ananth knows design. So I had to have my share of fun, so I tapped him and said, I do. Then he went absolutely pale because he said, "I didn't know you were here." But I think they are entitled to that reality check. You should be able to call people once in a while and provide them some reassurance that you're not talking complete theory. So provide the industry should provide technology update to students, and they should participate in applied research. It's good to remember that the values of the university are different from those of the marketplace. I think that's important to remember. In fact, we had a meeting here when Satyam, Ramlinga Raju, who is of Satyam, and the IT secretary were all here, and we were discussing the. Actually, we were discussing an MOU with Satyam in order to make more sophisticated programs. I mean, instead of the routine ones that we were doing. And in that, one of our students who was working with Satyam, typical of BTech students, he said very quickly, he said, "Professor Ananth, when are your students, when are they going to be ready for Satyam, employment by Satyam?" I said, with due apologies to Ramalinga Raju, I hope never. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You want specific things, you train them for it. What we teach them is what we enjoy. And we are going to share that with this thing. You have no business to ask me to prepare them for you." And Ramalinga Raju actually said, "I agree completely with Professor." So, but anyway, I think it's important to remember that they have a different requirement completely. And we shouldn't try to, meet that requirement. So then there's this knowledge economy that they talk about since the 70s. And the demands of the knowledge economy are twofold. One was, they said the university should contribute to the economy through intellectual property rights. That's when I discovered also that intellectual property rights actually constitute almost 40% of the gross national income in US, UK, and many of the developed countries. And I think in our country, it was less than 1% at that time. And the problem is that the really creative things come only from the university, and therefore the university has to contribute in this regard. Then second requirement was that the same knowledge economy, the UN had a report that said the gross enrollment ratio in higher education. The gross enrollment ratio is the ratio of students actually enrolled in higher education divided by the number that are eligible for higher education. And that ratio in India was at that time 15% or so. And the UN report said unless it's 30%, there's no way you can take advantage of the global economy. And the national program on technology enhanced learning was started at that time because we made a rough calculation. We needed one university, brick and mortar university, every week in order to meet the demands. And there was no way we were going to do that. So we said we'll create coursework. The original proposal was that we create this coursework, and the IITs together at that time were only 8. And together with the Institute of Science, we were going to create this material. And I said, after we create 600 courses, we should float a virtual IIT. The virtual IIT proposal didn't take off, and it's still not taken off. But the national program on technology enhanced learning went off very well. I'll say a few words later, but the research universities in the autonomy, I want to talk about the research park and the research universities in the economy. The research universities are the main source of creativity. Creativity in universities is of three kinds: discovery, invention, and innovation. Of these, innovation is the only one that's associated with the economy. For discovery and invention, you don't ask how can I make money out of this? I mean, it may come later, but you don't ask that question. In the case of innovation, you always ask the question, what's the economic benefit? Basically, innovation and entrepreneurship are central to the creation of intellectual property rights. And as I said, 40% of the gross income in the US and UK is from IPRs. So universities, we felt, need to manage their creativity better. And this was the starting point of the thinking for the creation of research parks in other countries. I mean, by the time we even started our work, there were at least 50 research parks in the UK, 150 in the US, and so on. And anyway, I'm reminded of an amusing incident in 2006, I think it was, and well before our research park came into place. The Commerce Secretary called me from Delhi and said, "You have to come to Delhi next week. The minister is giving out prizes for the largest number of patents by an academic institution. So I said, there must be some mistake. We had only 6 last year. He said others had less. So the fact is, it's not as if we were less innovative then, but we never had any provision for money for creating patents. Whereas the industry does that all the time. Any small improvement, they immediately patent it. And so it made sense. If you had a research park in which you were a partner with the industry, then the patents would increase. Incidentally, the number of patents today in IIT Madras is more than 200 per year. So from 6, we've gone to over 200. So question is, how do you manage creativity? Then the discovery and invention are managed by what is called the magic garden approach. They have a good name for it. And whereas innovation is managed by the idea factory approach. In both, you bring unlike minds together and create the right atmosphere. Give them freedom. In the case of the magic garden approach, you don't structure any interactions. If you're the director, you simply pray, because these guys are such brains, you have to hire them. But after hiring them, they may do nothing and retire. You still have to accept that fact and still have them on your roles. But if it's a matter of innovation, you do structure these interactions. Bell Labs did this. Actually, the American big companies are the ones that did it best between the two wars. And then others copied it. And the Bell Labs had this. They also had IPR, a person who was an expert in IPR and who was good at social interactions, interact with these people. And anytime he spotted something that was worth patenting, he would immediately go and patent it. And this worked very well in the industry in US between the wars. Minds, you need unlike minds. Minds can be unlike in terms of cultural background. The US graduate school is a big example. I think it makes a difference that when you mix these people from different cultures, it does seem to produce a lot of good research. And disciplinary background can be different. That's Bell Labs. Bell Labs actually had a group of chemical engineers, chemists, physicists, mathematicians, and mechanical engineers, and so on. And this group didn't have a name, but it was the group to which Bardeen and others belong. And that's when the discovery of the transistor occurred. Essentially, solid state physics. But then afterwards, they had a label called solid state physics, and I'm told they never were as productive afterwards, because now you needed a visa to enter. Do you have a solid state physics background? If you don't, you can't be part of the group. So, but you need something, you need a mix of disciplinary backgrounds. You also need a mix of people with different attitudes. For example, students who basically, they say, just have the desire to conquer whatever problem you give them, they want to attack and finish it. Then there is the professor who is always careful, because he'll check that whether the laws are used correctly and so on. And then there is the industry that is looking at profit from the venture. So you need a mix of minds, and these three minds need to be mixed, and that's where the university research parks came in. This is actually due to Sandhya Shekhar, who was our first CEO. He called it the golden triad of R&D personnel, IITM faculty, and IITM students. And innovations thrive when faculty, students, and industry personnel interact in a semi-formal atmosphere. I think this is important, the semi-formal atmosphere. I think we have these alumni get-togethers, and you find many of the alumni who come back here to the campus feel like students they were when they were long back as students here. Whereas in the research park, they seem to meet you on a more equal footing. In any case, I think that semi-formal atmosphere is important, must be outside the campus. So the University Research Park was already a well-known entity in the West. It was a property, it's essentially a property-based venture near a university campus, creating a local concentration of skill and technology, promotes innovation, competitiveness, and entrepreneurship, helps convert research ideas into innovative technologies. It houses R&D of large companies, and creating and nurturing startups. That's not part of the US scene, because in the US, you have venture capital ready. In India, by and large, venture capital comes only when the venture is already successful. So it is not that necessary. But I think it's changing. But we needed to we needed to reserve a part of the research park for startup. And we wanted to persuade our alumni to support such startups. They've done so very well. In fact, the IIT Madras Research Park is probably the most successful in terms of technological startups. So it should drive technology-led regional economic development. So why the IITM Research Park? When I first discovered, I looked at a significant fraction of the Silicon Valley IPR, intellectual property rights, in the 90s. I mean, I didn't do a thorough search, but about 100 I look at, 50 of them had Indian names in it, IITM names in it. A very large number. Of course, it's much more there in Silicon Valley than anywhere else. But then I went to MHRD and quoted Louis Pasteur. He said, discovery is the result of chance meeting a prepared mind. And like Aswattama Hata Kuncharaha, I hid a phrase. He said, meeting a prepared mind in the case of experimental research. I didn't tell them that. But I merely said this, and Sudeep Banerjee, who was the secretary at that time, was remarkable. I said, I therefore want a research park in the backyard. You have to support. He said, I will support you straight away. And actually, at that time, I was supposed to go to New York to meet some of our alumni had arranged a meeting with the World Bank. The World Bank was giving loans at 2%. So we thought we'd take 100 crores from the World Bank, make up some money here, and then start the research park. And Sudeep Banerjee said, you're not going all the way for 100 crores. I said, why? He said, it's a shame. No director of IIT should have to go for a paltry 100 crores. For 10,000 crores, by all means, go. He said, for 100 crores, I'll give it to you. I said, fine. He said, don't smile yet, because although I've said I'll give it to you, it will go through its own process and it'll take you 6 years to get the money. He was absolutely right. It was 2008 before the money came. But I think that's understandable because they have their procedures. They have, others can ask questions as to why are you giving them money. In fact, the first thing he said was, why should I give you a loan? When then if I give it to you, I have to give it to other IITs. And I said, you can't take that stand. I asked him, have you heard of three-legged race? And in which you tie up two legs. And then with 3 legs you run. I think the 100 meters dash record is something like 28 seconds or something. You won't get anywhere with it. So I said, when I have an idea, fund me. When somebody else has an idea, fund them. Don't try to fund everybody at the same time. But in any case, he said, fine. And so I told them IITs have been preparing minds and Chance has been meeting them in Silicon Valley. And that way their response was very good. So setting up the IIT MRP required central government. From the central government, we needed permission to set up a Section 8 company. Section 8 company is a non-profit company. And we needed partial monetary support. We also, the whole thing was triggered by the fact that the MGR Film City, which occupied 40 acres right across the road, was being closed down. And the government had announced that. So we approached, even when Professor Natarajan was there, I told him, and we approached the state government at that time for 11.5 acres. Actually, we asked for 10 acres at that time. And they said, I can't give it to you. The commercial rate is 60 crores per acre. So if you give me 600 acres, I'll give you 10 acres. And I said, there's no way you're going to get money from me. And then, so we told them, you have to give us land and infrastructure. But later on, when Narayanan was the finance secretary under the AIDMK government, I approached him again. When I became director, I approached him. And he said, it's not fair. You've got 620 acres and you want 12 acres from me. I said, I've got 620 acres of pure academic land. So I worship only Lakshmi there. I mean, Saraswati there. Across the road, I'm willing to worship Lakshmi along with you and the industry. And surprisingly, he said immediately yes. And on the file, he wrote saying, please put up the file for giving land to IIT. And then he, exactly like Sudeep Banerjee, he said, don't smile yet. It'll take you 6 years to get the land. And it did. Because everybody else asked, why give it to IIT alone? Why not give it to this person or that person? So, but so the cost estimate at that time, actually at that time, it was in 2001, the cost estimate was 220 crores. But the final cost was actually 450 crores. And out of that, about 1/3 we wanted from the government, but we got about 100 crores from the government as a grant, the Ministry of Education. And then 75 crore bank loan from Canara Bank. And the rest of it we made up through internal accruals. I mean, there are industries that were willing to pay for 20-year rent ahead of time. And there were corporate donations and also donations from alumni. We wanted about 1.2 million square feet. Again, this is a back of the stamp calculation. That is, we felt that we had 500 faculty members and we needed 5,000 industry people, because 1:10 is a good ratio for you to find a partner. It's not easy to find a partner. So if you want 5,000 people, I asked Mr. Burgapan how much space I would need, and he said 250 square feet per research worker in the research park. And if you multiply that, comes to about 1.2 million square feet. And that was also at that time, the FST requirements. So we built the 400,000 square feet in phase one. Lots of small troubles on the way, because first thing is MHRD said, don't do a Section 8 company, do a society. I said, I have consulted the best auditors. I had a bunch of auditors and this thing here with whom I consulted. They all said, use a Section 8 company, society can be taken over. And he said, we've not dealt with a Section 8 company before. I said, that's too bad. I am pretty adamant. I want only a Section 8 company. Then they actually went through and said yes. And then I had called Montek Singh Ahluwalia twice because I knew the planning commission would also be involved. He came here and gave a talk. And at that time, I was so obsessed with this, I spoke to him all about the research park. In fact, in between, he said, you already told me that about some things. But anyway, he went back and the planning commission raised an objection to this. So I called Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia. He said, I said, do you remember? Yes, I said, he said, I remember you told me twice. And then I told him that now the planning commission is objecting to it. He said, Ananth, not all papers come up to me. I said, now it has. And you'll be surprised, the next day from the planning commission, I got 3 calls saying, we are all for the research park, sir, we'll support him fully. And so then our MHRD was able to pass that and give us these. Then the housing of R&D companies, we decided 85% of the space would be for R&D companies. And for incubators, it'd be about 15%. And you have to provide venture capital, legal advice, and so on. So all that was part of it. Then Ashok Jhunjhunwala was the person in charge, and he came up with what is called a credit system for the research park. And the idea was that IIT Delhi had a bad experience, with IBM. They gave space to IBM, thinking they would interact with them in research, and IBM just locked the doors. They took the space, they paid a handsome rent, but they locked the door as far as research interaction is concerned. And Professor Raju was very disappointed. He thought there would be a lot of. And so we wanted to provide against that. So we had credits for various activities like R&D projects in IITM, consultancy, royalty, sponsored PhD, adjunct faculty, and so on. And if you add this up, you have to earn so much. The industry had to stay in the park. They had to earn so much for every 1,000 square feet. So this has been a good thing because we've been able to get rid of people who don't meet this criteria, but more importantly, most of them do. If they make an effort, they're able to meet the criteria. It's an iterative thing. This is phase one that this is the view from the other side. And this is phase two. This is the artist drawing, but this has been essentially achieved. It's exactly almost like this. And these are just some R&D clients as of 2011 I've written out there. And some incubators, some have moved out. Many of them were also, Ashok Jhunjhunwala had already had many companies. Those were moved to the research park. Dhwani Research was essentially from IIT Madras. And similarly, Home Research and Analytics and Healthcare Technology Innovation Center was from DBT. And Mr. Bhan was the secretary. He told me, because there is a research park, I'm going to give you the money. He said, I'm not willing to give it to IITs because you will spend it on your research, fundamental research, and you won't get anywhere translational activity. So then this is area-wise clients. This is just a figure to show that there were a variety of things. Everybody predicted that the research park would be an IT research park, but it wasn't. IT was a very small part of the thing. And, the auto sector at that time was down in this thing, but they still occupied about 8.3%. So the beginning was quite healthy. The full occupancy, 35 companies. That was the first tower alone, and 2,000 people in the very first year. Now it's 105,000. And then the luster of clusters, apparently when lots of small companies with same attitude occupy the space, they attract other companies to the research park. Then 200 student interns in the park. It has been a remarkable number. Over 40 patents in the first year I told you about it. Now it's over 200 per year. And enormous energy and enthusiasm in the entrepreneurial space. I must actually tell you that when Professor Dr. Chidambaram was the chairman of the board at that time, and he was very supportive, one of the best people I worked with. And I created this Section 25, Section 8 company and created a separate board for it. The director at IIT Madras was automatically the chairman of that board. We had two more people in this thing, and we had to have 3 secretaries from the state government because they insisted on it, because their contribution was significant. The land was very expensive. So all of this, then we had alumni and non-alumni from the industry in the board. And so this, he said, Dr. Chidambaram actually said, so you've eliminated the board. I said, no, sir, we'll keep you informed. And then I told him, sir, there's no way I can ask you, because if I ask you, you have to say no, because I have no business experience. And how do you expect the board to approve my taking a loan from the bank, 100 crores, what will that? He said, you're absolutely right, but we'll support you in principle. So we kept reporting to the board. And in 2006, he actually said, he called me and said, you should go to US to attend a meeting of the Association of the University Research Parks. There's a big meeting in Washington. And from the National Academy, there was a professor who was the convener. I forget his name now. But this meeting, he said, you go to this meeting on behalf of India. I said, what research park? He said, doesn't matter. You're the only one talking about research parks, so you go. So I go there, and the first speaker was a Chinese lady. She went and said, China has a very modest program, only 100 acres per research park, only 100 research parks, only $1.2 billion per research park. So I put up my hand and said, can I go last? What else do you say in the face of this? And then he said, nothing doing, you have to speak. And so I went and said, 1 research park, 100 crores. I didn't tell them what a crore was. I was hoping they would think something. But anyway, it was a very useful meeting because they gave a lot of suggestions. And also the North Carolina Triangular Research Park, which is now considered a very successful park. The president of that park was there, and he said, it's a beautiful business proposition. You break even very quickly. We broke even. We started in 1959. We broke even in 1989. So it sort of gave me a lump in the throat, because if it's going to be 30 years, what do I do? But I came back and they said any proposal to government of India should say success in 3 years. So we wrote a cash flow where we broke even in 3 years and sent it. But I'll tell you this story about that. That got stuck finally in revenue. The revenue secretary was one Sushma Nath, a very nice lady, IAS officer again. And when I went there, she said they were going to reject it. I mean, actually, Sandhya Shekhar had told me, sir, you have to go immediately. If they reject it, then it's very hard to resurrect anything. So I rushed to Delhi and I got a meeting with her. And she said she listened to me for half an hour, but she asked her subordinate, what did we do with that file? Ma'am, we are rejecting it. Why? Because we have not done it before. So I asked her, I said, I was quite frustrated. I said, that's a wonderful way to deal with progress. Then she said, don't be sarcastic. I've given you time now. I said, I'm very grateful to you. Then I explained to her. She said, explain the cash flow. I said, I can't. She said, what do you mean? You've got a spreadsheet here which breaks even in 3 years. I said, that's the rule, they said. If it's less than 3, if it's more than 3 years, they said your clerk won't put it up to you. And she said, that's true. And what do I do? I said, look, this is research, which is uncertain, and it's conversion to technology and profit, which is even more uncertain. So I would say, I wouldn't trust any flow chart that's given to me like that. I give it to you only because it has to come up to your level. And then she laughed and said, are you always this frank? I said, usually I'm more frank. Today I'm quite nervous because I already spent a lot on the research work. And so she finally rewrote the whole thing. She listened to me very carefully, asked many good questions, and then she rewrote the note supporting us. And then we got the money. So it was quite tricky, but at the same time, I think we have to accept the fact that I mean, if I had been in their place, I would have behaved the same way, because I am answerable to the parliament and I don't know anything about it except that there's this old guy who is not going to be there for more than 5 years who comes and says, give me a lot of money. And so it was remarkable. It finally came through very uh, apparently smoothly, but it is an extremely arduous process. And the lesson learned was that you have to take people with you, you have to be patient, you have to explain things to people. And then top officials I found once on board were very helpful, including the 3 IAS officers who are on our board here. And then the poor funding support from Ministry of Education, essentially pressure of servicing debts could dilute the overarching objectives of the research park. We've been lucky, this one has worked out so far well. But the power and value of ideas in the IP generated are better measures of success than financial performance. This is something that you have to convince people about. If you don't, you're going to have trouble with. Then the knowledge economy in GER, essentially the NP, this is what about NPTEL, needed a GER of about 30% at least. This was in 2001. Now we are past 30 to succeed in the knowledge economy. At that time, India was at 20, less than 20 actually. China was at 50 and US was at 80, so on. And so high demand, severe faculty shortage, and massive online education we felt was the only choice. So we proposed this along with other IITs, and we proposed modular courses in web and video formats, but the web format didn't work out too well. For some reason, the video format is what took off. Actually, Professor Murli Manohar Joshi, who was then the first minister when he granted this money, insisted that it should be in video format. He said, our people need the face of a teacher in the rural areas, so you should have it in video format. And the syllabi were based on major affiliating universities. In the world's, it's now probably the world's largest collection of open courseware. Then the funding of NPTEL was 26 crores to begin with to create the studios in the 7 IITs and ISC. And then we had about 90 crores at 7 lakhs per course sanctioned to develop 120 courses in 5 disciplines. Because Mangal Sundar was primarily responsible in getting things done. Although we got quite a good cooperation from all the other IITs as well. And anyway, this was completed in 2008 when Arjun Singh came and released the thing. And then phase 2 was about 200 crores. Now it's much more. I don't know the exact funding, but on paper, the funding is much more. Okay, then I want to talk a little bit about governance. I mean, along with those issues goes two things. One is governance, the other is ethics. Governance of universities, it's typically by a board. And the reason I want to talk about this is because I think it's not clear what governance is. Governance actually, it's sort of, there's a leadership among equals. And the only way you govern an institution is by persuasion rather than by any diktat. And the boards typically oversee the financial health strategy and director's performance and help preserve autonomy. And the director and his team lead, manage finances, establish systems, etc. The Senate has the last word in academic matters. I think this is a very important factor that we should take into account. I've had 2 secretaries tell me what we should start, courses that we should start. I said, you can't tell me that casually. I have a Senate that will decide whether this can be done or not. And they said, no, you take my advice. I have 40 years of experience. And I told them a story from IIT Madras. It's a story that when the first director, Professor Sengupta was here, and there was Professor Valluri, who was later NAL director, who was the youngest professor in IIT Madras. He was in the Senate, and Sengupta couldn't convince Valluri of some things. And then finally he looked at him and said, young man, I have 40 years of experience in this matter. And then Valluri said, I beg your pardon, sir, what you have is 1 year's experience 40 times over. So it's very hard to counter such things. But actually, the fact is that the Senate is so I've told these people the Senate is the final authority, and I can't do anything without the Senate's consent. And they believed it. And finally, I think it's important that we assert that. But I think our Senate is not sufficiently proactive. We ought to come up with ideas about what we are going to do next. We're not doing that. And if we did that, then we'll keep them busy. Then they won't ask you. the guiding principles of governance, we had Charles West, who was former president of MIT, visit us here. Our Deshpande brought him here. He was on the board of MIT. And he came and spoke, and some of the things he said were very important principles of governance. Is suspension of disbelief, because if you may disbelieve something, but you can't stop it at that time. You should allow the person to try and prove that's right. And he said, loftiness of goals is no guarantee against intolerance and close-mindedness. And faculty autonomy to develop and nurture ambience of creativity. I think that's particularly important. And transparency in administration. He said, with a predisposition to assist and a sense of pride in helping make things happen. And creativity abhors bureaucracy. And the latter can upset the balance between trust and accountability, mistake incentives for values, and fall into a mindset of saying no rather than experimenting. I think we have seen that happen in IIT Madras also. So I think it's important that we preserve these things with some care. And creating an atmosphere of trust. This is important partly because of this. The left brain is logical and is accountable for its actions. The right brain its creativity stems from freedom from logic, and therefore it's not accountable for its actions. The right brain can thrive only in an atmosphere of trust. So academic freedom, transparency in governance, and ethical behavior are prerequisites for creating an atmosphere of trust. So I think that's why the atmosphere of trust is so important. And we've had times when there wasn't enough trust and it sort of hurts. A primer on finances. The university's product, Charles West said, is education, not the graduates. He said, don't hang on to a graduate and say this is my product and brag about it, because a bad student will come up and spoil your reputation. So the point is that the product is education, and production cost is determined by the expenses. Its price is invariably lower than the cost. The difference between them is subsidy. In public universities, subsidy comes from the state. But the guiding principle is never cut down on expenses that can compromise product quality. Instead, strive constantly to find additional sources of funding. My experience, if it's a good cause, you can always find additional sources of funding. It takes patience, of course. But okay, some guidelines for leadership among equals. It's good to remember that we are not the kartas. I mean, you plan various things. Some things happen, some things don't happen. So you have to have somebody's backing. But second is absence of vested interest lends clarity to decision making. In most cases, the confusion arises only if you have vested interest. And preserve the perception of power. I remember a guy from Bell Labs. Actually, I was in Princeton. There was a lady called Hall. And her husband was in the Bell Labs. He was a vice president. He told me, Ananth, in a democracy, there is no power, but there is perception of power. And he said, do not destroy the perception of power by exercising the power that you do not have. It's a beautiful statement. And I remember this very vividly because I was dean with Professor Swami, and we pulled up a computer science guy he wasn't conducting himself well, and we pulled him up and suspended him. And within 3 months, he came back with a smile on his face because we didn't have enough written evidence against him. We don't document everything that people do. So we're not good at that. So don't exercise the power. You exercise the power. And then he came back and he was very annoying. He would seek us out and smile at us. Say, you tried to throw me out. See, I'm back. So do not try to win arguments by pulling rank. I've already said that. And then do not kill any idea at t is equal to 0. What happens in the Senate test, people will oppose a new idea. They said, we've tried this before and so on. I think the whole idea is not to kill it at t is equal to 0. If it's a bad idea, it will die a natural death. So you can allow it to die. Then last one is do not carry grudges. I think that's important. I remember a nice story that is attributed to Gautama Buddha. Is in one of the speeches by Annie Besant. There are two bodhisattvas who were walking along. And there was a small river, and there was a flash flood in the river. And the water current was too strong, and a young girl was standing on the bank of the river, too afraid to cross, but she had to go to the other side. So when the bodhisattvas came up, the one bodhisattva lifted the girl, put her on his shoulder, crossed the river, and left her on the other side. And after a couple of kilometers, the second bodhisattva said, how can you, a bodhisattva, carry a maiden girl on your shoulder. And this fellow turned back and said, "Are you still carrying her? I left her at the bank." I think it's a beautiful story. I think the idea is not to carry grudges. If you have a grudge, close it as soon as you can. So I think those are some guidelines. Then I want to say last topic is the ethics in young. This is from Schrodinger's book. Throughout history, the teaching of ethics has always assumed the form "thou shalt" and so on, that of a preacher, the words of a preacher. The young argue that God is nature. Nature may be credited with having formed them as she wants them to be. All ethical teaching is therefore priest's fraud. Sounds very logical. The problem is they grow up and hear the same argument from their children. So there's no way of quickly solving this problem. The need for ethics is both Jacob Bronowski says that, and also from our Vedantic texts, we had one of the people who I'm going to talk about him. He also came and spoke about this. He said essentially the same thing. All animals are either social or solitary. Man alone aspires to be both. Need for ethics follows from our biological transformation from solitary to social animals, from our attempts to resolve the apparent conflict between the desire to fulfill our wishes and the need to discharge our social responsibilities. So what is good for the individual may not be good for the whole. And the ethics in the university, most common breach of ethics is plagiarism. I think even in IITs, I'm surprised at the number of students who don't understand plagiarism. They in fact, some of them are very naive that way. But in any case, plagiarism is the biggest problem, the theft of ideas, concepts, and the associated credit. And cut and paste makes it easy, but like all unethical practices, it only adds to our insecurity. Plagiarism undermines the essence of scholarship in a competitive intellectual marketplace. Finally, research is an exercise in ethics and a test of character. I think this is crucial. We have to avoid all plagiarism. There have been bad cases and we've caught some of them and so on. The role of ethics in society is like that of grammar in language. Grammar makes language understandable. Ethical rules make social living possible. Rules of grammar impose discipline, yet enable creative freedom and richness of artistic expression. Ethical rules similarly constrain us, yet enrich our conduct in a civilized society and free us from feelings of guilt. All ethical rules are based on values. The question is, how do our values formed? And first is education in values about right and wrong, largely inspired by religion in India. And education in values mediated by informal structures like extended family, religious discourses, the panchayats, and the law. The first three appear to be breaking down. And the law is a technicality and no substitute for education in values. In fact, I keep remembering, we had a JEE crisis here. The chairman JEE came to see me and he was very upset. And he said, "Sir, they are hiring, I forget, the gentleman Bhushan, the famous lawyer." And so they said, "So what do we have to do?" He said, "We have to hire Venugopal." So the case was very clear in our favor. But in order to win, you have to have first a lawyer that the judge will even listen to. So we did hire Venugopal. We won the case very casually. Prashant Bhushan was the lawyer on the other side. And so, I mean, this has become a technicality. Whoever knows the law better, whoever's the bigger lawyer wins. And it's necessary to articulate universal values transport to a new idiom for the middle class. I think this is important, but I don't know how to do it. I don't know how anybody can do it easily. It has to be a person of commanding presence with a known integrity and so on, who can also articulate things, maybe a Vivekananda again. But meanwhile, Swami Dayananda Saraswati, he came and spoke here in our CLT, and he came to release a book, but he made a very good point. He said, non-violence is the only universal value. He said, you don't want to be hurt, you can't hurt others. And he said, non-violence includes not just physical violence, but you're talking absence of physical violence, but also absence of any kind of hurt that you can cause to others. So he said the other values could include power, wealth, which is artha, power and wealth come under artha, and the fulfillment of desires, which is kama. He said the value of non-violence, teach students don't try to teach students that don't try to teach students the value directly of artha, kama, and so on, but tell them that the value of non-violence is much greater than the value of artha and kama. So then it's the latter are worth acquiring only if the means are non-violent. So if they do earn those by non-violent means, they welcome to it. And Krishna says in the Gita, if you walk the path of dharma, I'll walk with you, otherwise you walk alone. And then Swami Dayananda Saraswati asked the students, this was the last day after the exams. The students were still there, the CLT was quite full. He had spoken to the students, and there was a rumor that player next to Taramani guest house, that temple, that God will give you 5 marks if you go around him before you go to the exam. And a large number of students who never went around that player always will go around him, and they go to the. If you get 5 marks more, why not? And he said that he asked how many of you went around the player yesterday. And nice thing about our undergraduates particularly is they're quite truthful in all this. About 90% of the hands went up, and they said we all went around the player. So that's what he means. If you walk the path of dharma, I'll walk with you. Otherwise, you walk alone. So he said you teach them the value of values. I think this is the last one. This is ethics and science. I don't know if you've read the book on by Robert Jung on essentially the development of the atom bomb. It's called Brighter Than a Thousand Suns. It's a beautiful book. And getting in the 30s, in fact, he describes getting in those years between the wars. And that description is enough to make you a romantic and go and join a university. You may be disappointed afterwards. But getting in the 30s embodied the free spirit of science, the helpless search for true understanding, mindless of the consequences. That's a quote from Edward Teller. Helpless search for true understanding, mindless of the consequences. He was asked after World War II what he was doing. He said he was just trying to get the hydrogen bomb, understand the hydrogen. They said after all that has happened, then he said this. He said, I can't help it. My curiosity is so much that I can't help working on it. And Hitler in World War II shattered this beautiful world. Hiroshima exposed us, and General Omar Bradley, who led the development of the atom bomb effort from the non-scientific side, he said, we've become a world of nuclear giants and ethical infants. And the results of research may be ethically neutral, yet the researcher cannot dissociate himself with its applications. I think this is important. The only way we have to tackle it is by keeping the public educated about everything we do. If we can do that, then an educated public is the best protection against non-ethical use of things. I think that's the last. Thank you very much.
Nandita, question and answer session.
It's okay.
Don't pull the chat.
You can sit and
Yeah, just pull the chat.
Hello. If there are any questions from the online participants, you can go ahead. INAE digital team, can you please unmute them so that they can ask questions?
Yes, ma'am. I'm just unmuting all. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you unmuted?
Yes, ma'am. All can unmute themselves and can ask the question if they want.
Okay. So while we are waiting for their questions, is there any question from the physical audience present here?
This one you.
I had one, if I may. Now, I greatly enjoyed the talk, first of all, and I was wondering, is NPTEL initiative educating people in rural areas is, I mean, that is certainly understandable given the large distances that you have in your country, but the question for me would be, how do you get people to socialize? I have the impression that education in a university environment has to do a lot. It's what's happening in the hostels at evenings, with gathering, socializing, doing something together. And also inspiration and creativity comes in this. And with remote teaching, how do we solve this?
I don't know. We have discussed this a lot, and the point is that sometimes the secretary used to say, the best is the enemy of the good. If you wait for the best, it will never happen. So something has to be done. This was more because of lack of teachers everywhere. So we could provide this free of cost. And mind you, this is completely free of cost. The government of India pays for it, all of it. And if you can do that, then at least the material is available to them. And all I can say is that a lot of people have thanked me for, I was only symbolically the head, but there were a large number of faculty who were involved in it. As I said, Professor Mangal Sundar was the most active faculty member in that. And I think it was received very well, but I have no solutions for what you say. I don't know how to. In fact, we had this problem. We asked some students, one of the students also, and he said, sir, my friends are all on the net. I don't have any physical friends anyway. It's one of our own students. He said that and he said he was quite happy to have international friends.
If I can just add two bits to what Professor Ananth said, both Amitav and I, we have NPTEL lectures. And even today, we keep receiving a lot of mails from people we do not know from all over the world saying how much they benefited from these courses. I mean, this has been really the high point of my teaching career, the way the NPTEL lectures have been received. So it has served a lot of useful purposes, I would say.
I must say, from my point of view, these people wrote to me as chairman of the NPTEL and said, sir, we want to pay for it. We've benefited so much, but I refuse to take any money because the minute you take money, the whole thing gets clouded. The issue becomes very clouded.
Yes. Hello, Ananth. This is Raj Chabda. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. So, first of all, thank you. I really enjoyed the talk. My question really is that do you feel that there is a need to do a NPTEL at the school level? Because we have a dearth of really good teachers there. And I think our school system is really in a bad shape.
I would say yes, but it needs to be organized very carefully. You have to have a bunch of schools that are recognized who get together with the teachers, and then you add teachers. For example, here we started with the 7 IITs and IASC, but we also added faculty from other institutions. I think you have to add all that, and it is possible in principle, but organizing it is very hard. Secondly, school teachers are all overworked. So typically they teach 16 hours a week. I don't know how they manage it because week after week, 16 hours is quite hard. And if something could be done to pay them respectably, then I think it can be organized. I think it'd be wonderful if it's there, but it's not easy.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
I have a comment and a question. The comment is that we see lots of people using the term reimagining the university and so on. I'm so glad that you did not use that term. It's a tired expression, and I find it very tiring too. And the question is, do you think there is a role for a physical university to disappear?
I don't think so. But on the other hand, I'm not imaginative enough. 100 years from now, I don't know what the human species will be like.
We built a lot of classrooms in IIT, probably not expecting the new normal after COVID. And
no, but I think the classrooms are all used everywhere.
will it continue to be used?
That I don't know.
Yeah, that is the question that I have.
My personal feeling is it will continue to be used. I think there's a lot of difference. When you meet on a campus, the amount of learning that occurs on campus is tremendous, and it's not because of the teachers alone. It's because of the classmates, because of the atmosphere, and so on. So,
as a retiree, I only see these announcements on the net. saying we've done that, we've done this, and it seems that a lot of it is going on outside the classroom, not in the classroom.
It's happening also. What's in the classroom is never reported. Our alumni typically come back. There must be alumni here today, but they spoke once about their whole wonderful experience in IIT. They spoke for half an hour and not one word about a course that they took. So, and at that time, Muthuraman was the chief guest for that function. So I got up and you remember that their advertisement, we also make steel, Tata Steel. So I said, we also teach courses. then they came up and said, no, we enjoyed some courses and so. But this is typical. When you're a student, you're talking about things that you enjoy as a whole together. And coursework is not enjoyed together. There's some pockets of groups of students who enjoy it, others don't, and so on. In fact, one of the biggest problems in teaching is that you're always out of phase with your student. I mean, ideally, they would like you to come and teach at midnight. And ideally, you want to teach in the morning and go back home. So there's no connection.
The last question is, do you have an IPR on your presentation?
No.
Can you put it up on the retiring?
It will be put up on the INAE website.
No, what is the PowerPoint?
So you asked Professor Ananth to send
I'll give it to you. That's all.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
May I ask a question?
If Ananth shares it with us,
Yeah.
I will put it up on the INAE Chennai chapter.
Yeah.
Yes, please go ahead.
Look.
Yeah, Ananth, really enjoyed your talk with a lot of insight and obviously your typical style with a lot of quotations and humor and so on. Two things I want to ask you. One is, if you were to start a university today, what subjects would you start with? Would it be science, engineering, humanities, or a combination? And alongside, is it time that we should think in terms of full service universities?
Yeah, well, I do think all the subjects should be there, ideally. But it's very hard. For example, I don't know if you've read this E.O. Wilson's Consilience. It's there on the web also. He says essentially humanities played an important role in the understanding of science as well. As long as science and humanities both looked at the world with only the 5 sense organs. But he says now science is looking at the world with the entire electromagnetic spectrum, whereas humanities doesn't. And he says, therefore, humanities is not able to offer a perspective. But he says if they do, then it will again integrate. More people will enjoy doing humanities subjects and so on. I don't know how far he is right, but he's certainly a very intelligent man with very keen insights. So my feeling is also that we need to work a lot more on the humanities subjects. And, the best people in humanities should be put together and asked to revamp the syllabi. And if that happens, then I think there is a chance that humanities will again come back to provide a perspective on what science sees. And I think all the subjects should be taught at the same campus. I mean, in that sense, IITs are also handicapped a bit. We don't have law, we don't have medicine. That's why our biomedical coverage are also limited.
As a continuation of that, how can you bring more creativity, innovation in the teaching, learning process? You can answer it very briefly because it's a very long answer, maybe. But
no, I think the main way is to just liberate people. I mean, not constrain them. The more constraints you put, the less you will have of discovery. And if somebody comes up with 25 ideas and 24 of them are rotten and one is good, he's still contributing much more than a person who doesn't give any ideas. So I think the idea is to allow people the freedom to talk. And I do think this atmosphere of trust is far too important for creativity. And we're not paying enough attention to it. Yes. Every time there is a despotic action on campus, there's something like that, then it ruins creativity.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you.
I think Guhan has a question here.
Hi. As usual, I enjoyed your talk a lot, Prasanna. So I have a question relating to the costs of education. Actually, one would imagine that with the advent of online education, Coursera, NPTEL, etc., and the virtual university, including our online BS program, one would see the cost of education going down a lot. On the other hand, you do see that in many universities, especially private universities, the costs of education are going up. Fee structures going up a lot, especially in the US. So how do you see this panning out in future? Because one imagines that people pay much more for the brand of a university rather than the cost of the education that they get from the university. And it's that the brand value of the universities, certain universities are going up, and how would that get affected versus, with all these online universities coming into?
It's a difficult question that you're asking, but basically, I personally don't think it's going to be replaced completely by, physical education. Physically, face-to-face education is going to be replaced by web education. It's not going to be completely replaced. There will always be a small fraction that will want this. But as far as cost is concerned, costs will go up because everybody wants a little more salary.
So what are people paying for when they're paying such high costs for education?
Well, in the long run, they're paying for good education, but they don't all get it. It depends on what the mental frame of mind which they come with. Because a lot of our students, like you say, they now want to get into IIT and they think once they've entered IIT, it's all done. So you have to tell them as soon as they
more to get into IIT than the fees that they pay while they are at IIT, right? If you look at the coaching class industry, that is what one is concerned about. Is that IITs have become more of a brand value than the educational value that they provide.
And this is bound to be true, but there will be a fraction of students who don't see the brand value; they see the actual value of education. And also, if you look at it, you need a certain fraction of educated people. Not necessarily people who come to IIT alone, from all over the place. And it's that fraction that's going to teach the others how to live or how the country should progress and so on. So I don't think you can expect much larger fraction of the people to be interested.
How do you expect this to impact the private university? You see a lot of, for example, private colleges in Tamil Nadu, etc., many of the AICT colleges closing down because there is no real education provided and the employment opportunities are less. So do you think this will get impacted a lot? This is my last question.
I have discussed this before with Mr. Kapil Sibal, also asked in the council, over tea. He was a very interesting man to talk to. So he said these lousy private universities. I told him, you can't do that as an education minister. You can't say that. They exist only because you're not providing enough education for the people. And if they exist, then the thing to do is to encourage them. I was quoting Vivekananda. I said, Vivekananda said, you focus on good people, their numbers will increase. If you focus on bad people, their numbers will increase. And I said, you may as well focus on the good ones. And you should provide subsidy for the good ones, or even if you don't know whether it's good or bad, provide subsidy for all private education institutions, just like you do for other institutions in the country. Like if you do it for 90% for IIT, do at least 20% for the private education institutions. Then there is a chance that some idealism will survive. I think if you want it, you have to provide it. And the only person who can afford the money is the government itself. In any case, otherwise they're going to spend it on a bomb. So you may as well fight for your fraction of the. The defense budget is enormous compared to the education budget.
I have one question. There's so much of violence all around. How do you think that education will help to propagate non-violence, which is a very fair means? How?
I have no idea. You're asking too difficult a question. I think you hope that a large number of people believe in it. And if you believe in it, then you can communicate it much more effectively.
No. I have a belief that education should inculcate the value of non-violence. How
I think you can do that. You can do that only when they are very, very young. By the time they come to a college, you're beyond. They are beyond your thing.
Sir, I have a related question.
think that's the question there.
Yeah, I have a related question to Professor Narayanan. Considering the effect of social media today, do you not think that it's very difficult to even impress young people, impress the importance of non-violence even on young people?
I don't know. I think it is difficult, but it was always difficult. I think it's religion has lost its sting, so people no longer believe that God will. In fact, my complaint about the Gita is Krishna says, "Sambhavami yuge yuge." Once a yuga is not enough; he has to come every day, so that there is some improvement in the situation. But actually, I don't have any answers for this. But I think we will take a beating and then we'll come back. Civilization will sort of oscillate. Once it takes a beating, then they will all swing the other way and so on. I don't see any simple solutions to this.
Okay, I think we have one more online question.
And some question there also.
Yeah.
Right there. Yeah.
Okay. Ramji, you go ahead.
Regarding humanity, humanities definitely is important, but
Switch it on. Yeah, it's on.
given the current wokeism that is sweeping, especially the universities in the US, I don't know if you want that kind of humanities here. This is one comment regarding humanities. I have another question. I don't know if you want to respond to that first.
No, I don't have any answers for that. I think US hardly has any humanities. I mean, they used to have a reasonable amount of it, and there used to be people in the humanities department who knew their science very well. But that's somewhat rare. I mean, good universities still have them. But otherwise, US education is not something to be copied except in graduate schools in engineering and science. That's my personal opinion.
The other question I had is we have very serious flaws in our structure of education. We make students choose their stream at the end of 10th standard. We don't have, unlike in the US, where they get to the university, see a large number of subjects, and decide on the specialization at the end of the second year, where they are far more ready and mature to choose what they want to do than asking them to choose something when they have no clue what they are signing up for, which they do only due to sheer peer pressure. And we have not built the university model here, and we have really missed the bus on that. And you really need a good university in several places, even in one state. And the land prices are so much, we cannot think of doing that now when we could have done it far more easily than earlier. And whenever we talk about education, we talk about higher education, and we are completely not talking about school education, how bad it is, and the need for structural reforms, and also making teachers the profession attractive and attracting good people there. So there are so many fundamental flaws in our education that it really saddens me that we keep harping about higher education when school education is not even being thought of.
Actually, I don't fully agree with you. We don't talk about school education, but the school teachers do. And in fact, the secretary school education has many more meetings with teachers all over India than the secretary higher education. But on the other hand, I agree with you that not enough is being done, and I think school teachers are not rewarded enough. I think they do so much work and they build the character of the children. And I think they ought to be rewarded much better.
Yeah, even if the education secretary keeps talking to school teachers much more than, say, with university teachers, they're not addressing the structural problem, like asking the students to choose a stream at the end of after 10th.
I know, but I think basically I've been in the US too, and I've on sabbatical leave. I've often had to advise undergraduates who come and say, should I do this? Should I do that? I mean, I told them, if you're going to ask me between two courses, toss a coin. Because it really doesn't matter which course you do. In fact, this Nobel laureate in Caltech was once asked, he was teaching physics to freshmen. The freshmen asked him, what are you going to teach us? And he said, it doesn't matter what I teach you, it's how I teach you that matters. I think that's the important thing. Sort of attitude is what is important. And from formal higher education, only a small fraction benefit and benefit society as well. But that fraction is important. You don't know what that fraction is, so you teach a large number of people. That's how it works. I mean, it's not as if we all know exactly what needs to be done. If I knew exactly what needs to be done, it would be very easy. And in fact, somebody told me that I was influencing the students a lot about their entire future and all that. And I said, if that is true, I'll resign tomorrow because I don't know. As a human being, I'm fairly ignorant about what is good in the long run, what is not good in the long run. So I'm not willing to influence. I'm willing to tell them what I prefer, and I let them choose what they prefer. But if they all going to listen to me, I would resign and go. Really, it's quite scary.
Yeah, I think one person is waiting online for quite some time. So please go ahead with your question.
Sudhanshu?
Yeah, Sudhanshu Chakravarti.
Is he still there?
Yeah. Yeah, his hand is still raised. Is there a question, Mr. Chakravarti? I also see a raised hand from Mr. Karthik Atmanathan. So please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, Professor Ananth, good afternoon, sir. I'm actually an alumnus. I passed out in 87 and I've moved from industry as a professor of practice at IITM. Last 2 years, I've been kind of engaged in the institute. My question is related to HR practices in institutes, especially institutes like IIT, where there is a larger purpose and there is more funding. You know that teaching involves a lot of passion, and R&D also involves passion for you to really do something. But it's very rare that a person would have passion for both. Not that it's impossible, but it's rare. What are the chances on the human resource policy for faculty? What are the chances for two things to happen? First one, you need not compete with industry compensation, but at least you need to be able to get a little bit more of more talent. The number of people who join, all of them are brilliant, but there are not enough of them. It's so difficult to get people into the system. So one, what are the chances of actually upping the compensations, at least to an acceptable level? Second, in terms of assessment or appraisal system or whatever, apart from the research related publishing metrics, how about a separate stream for metrics on teaching, where people join for the pleasure and passion of teaching and not really doing research work? And also have one more stream where people want to do both, right? So that it's open for all types of people. What are your thoughts on this, sir?
No. Basically, this freedom is there for faculty in IITs. I mean, once somebody becomes a professor, if they want to choose to concentrate on teaching, they can. They lose nothing by doing that. So they'll settle to these steady states on their own. But I'm very, very reluctant to allow evaluations to take place on all fronts. I remember quite long ago in 1963, Rajagopalchari came to AC College of Technology when I was a student there. And he looked at us, we were all great admirers, we were right at his foot. And he stared at us and said, nowadays, evaluation has become more important than teaching. I believe you have exams every year. I don't know what he'll say now. But the fact is that, by doing this, you're training people in a particular way, how to remember what was said in class and how to say it again in the exam. And that's not the whole this thing at all, purpose of education at all. In fact, I suggested that I teach a class now and keep the exam 3 years later. What they remember of that lecture is what they have benefited from the course. Otherwise, so in terms of evaluation, we are also very, very good at what I call form filling. If you give me a form and tell me this form will be filled and you will be evaluated, I'll find out how to get the right entries in the columns without bothering to actually do the job effectively. So I think if people are passionate, just let them go about doing it passionately, and others will follow suit if they have any interest at all. I also think that The fees right now, the salaries are not at all bad. I mean, there's no point comparing with the industry. Industry has its own fads and it has its own value system. But as far as faculty in IIT are concerned, I hope I'm talking for the young faculty as well. After the 6th pay commission, I think people are not unhappy at all.
After 7th pay commission. It's better after 7th pay commission.
Yeah. After 7th, it's even better. After the 6th itself, there's been no complaint. In fact, it is after the 6th pay commission that we've had traffic jams in IIT because every family has 2 cars. So I don't think the salary is a problem. And if we wish to, we can do a lot of consultancy. That we don't choose not to is our choice. It's not. Excuse me.
I have a comment on the salary thing. I think the question you should ask is, what would be the salary you would be willing to take in industry to give up the academic job?
Correct.
I think the kind of lifestyle we have compensates far more for the,
I think it depends on the individuals.
So I have a personal thumb rule, which is about 3 times the salary that one receives.
Yeah. One of my students came back to me when I was director. I mean, he was a student 30 years before that. He came and said, I don't see how you're sitting in that seat, receiving a salary that is less than my party allowance. And I told him, and I knew him quite well, I told him, what a shame, you get so much of party allowance, so you will have to go around partying with your customers. He was in the marketing side, with your customers and do boring stuff. Whereas the minute I get bored here, I just go home and read a novel. There's nobody to question what I do. And 1 month later, the fellow resigned his job. Then came back to me. I said,
so you influenced him.
No, yeah, but I didn't. I said, I didn't expect you to do that. He said, no, sir, I was thinking along those lines myself. You only precipitated the issue. So I think it's a matter of taste and thing. I do think the salaries were very bad in the 5th pay. During the 5th pay commission, I didn't encourage any of my students to come back. But after the 6th pay, I've told people, we are very comfortable. If you come back and you like the job, that's nothing like it.
There is another question at the back.
I think you should also. I'm a research scholar. I just like.
Come forward. There's a mic here.
Should also try to close.
Yeah.
Can use the mic if you like.
No, you just speak it. It's getting recorded.
I'm a research scholar. Just like this month only, I submitted my thesis, and I am looking for a postdoctoral in a foreign. Like me, many people in India are looking for postdoctoral fellowship, or they want to do in the foreign countries rather than in India. My comment is like maybe the government is not giving more importance to the research in India compared to others. How you?
No, the total budget for education for recruiting research and everything is smaller in India than in some other countries that we tend to compare with.
Yes, and there is like if we will go foreign for postdoctoral, people have like what we can call like that more weightage will come. If you do same postdoctoral in India.
I think that's not true. We hire for faculty and we ask questions there. How the person performs in the interview is what really counts. It's not really a matter of whether they can come from a good place or an ordinary place and so on. We have some of the faculty who are very, very successful are all, as Mashelkar would say, all local products completely.
But compared to now, present generation, there the what you can call production is less. Now, like production is more people are coming out, and for these people, for one post there are like 1,000 is to 1, 1 lakh is to 1, and people are telling that for some cases for sweeper job or so.
We should discuss this afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think
maybe you can take it offline.
Yeah.
I hate to stop this conversation. I mean, it's so interesting, but because of lack of time, we have already overspent by 15 minutes. So I think we'll have to close this. But before we close the meeting, it's my pleasant duty on behalf of INAE Chennai chapter as well as on my personal behalf to present the vote of thanks. And first of all, I would like to thank Professor Ananth. He has, what can I say about him? He has always been an excellent speaker. I have listened to him. All of us, most of us here have listened to him a number of times. And still, we do not want to miss an opportunity to listen to him once again.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much, sir. And as Professor Narayanan said, this is the first time we are having an in-person meeting for INAE Chennai chapter. So we are very glad that you are the person to give that lecture. So thank you very much. And I would of course like to thank INAE headquarters and more importantly the INAE digital team for helping us so much in setting up this meeting in hybrid mode. And thanks to Professor Andrew and the NPTEL team, particularly Mr. Sri Balaji, for making all these arrangements. As I keep saying, this is only fitting that Professor Anand's lecture is held in the NPTEL studio, considering he is the mastermind behind the whole NPTEL episode. And finally, my thanks to all the audience for being here in person and also attending. I can see a lot of people attend online in online mode. So thank you very much, all of you, and also for asking such interesting questions. And therefore, the discussion session was as interesting as the talk itself. Thank you very much. We hope to have some more interesting sessions in the coming days again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.